Hey, welcome back everyone. It's me Sushant. Today what we are going to see is how you can set up your Windows Virtual Desktop session host. Particularly we are going to focus on the ARM version or the Spring update. If you are quite new to Windows Virtual Desktop, please go to a guide-to-cloud.com. I have written few articles which will help you fast track to get you started with Windows Virtual Desktop. Particularly this article explains what are the benefits of Windows Virtual Desktop, why you would use Windows Virtual Desktop instead of an RDS example. There is another article specifically talking about what are the infrastructure changes, what are the components which Microsoft takes care for you so that you're not worried about configuring RD Web, RD Gateway, Broker, etc. Another important virtual machine details you need to understand is how can you right size a virtual machine before you pick a virtual machine for Windows Virtual Desktop. If you're picking a machine for a multi-session or a single session, you need to understand few details. How many users can you accommodate in a single VM? What type of workload you're gonna pick for a particular user? Make sure you go through that details before picking the right VM. And like I said, the whole demo today is all about ARM version. ARM is the new version of Windows Virtual Desktop, or it is been known as Spring Update 2020. So the whole demonstration from now onwards, I'm gonna concentrate on how you can set up and configure your Windows Virtual Desktop environment using ARM version. Let's get started. So sign into your Azure portal. Make sure that you're using a global administrator username and password, or at least you need to be an owner in your Azure subscription before you start setting up your Azure. So I'm going to sign in as my global administrator. And after you sign in, click on subscriptions. Make sure you select the right subscription for the deployment. And on the left-hand side, find the resource provider. So what we're going to do is we are going to register Microsoft Desktop Virtualization as the right resource provider and authorize that to your subscription before we proceed. So now search for Microsoft Desktop Virtualization. Select and hit the register button to make sure that you're registering. You would see a blue icon next to the provider while it is been registering. So it is going to take probably 1 minute or so. So I'm going to fast track. I'll see you on the other side. Looks like the registration has been completed. All you have to do is hit on that refresh button to make sure that you get that green tick box. So the first part is completed. The second part is go to your domain controller. It can be a domain controller in Azure, or it can be an ADDS as well. In this example, we are going to see a domain controller. I'm going to make sure that I have an admin account set up and ready for my next step. All you need to do is make sure that you have an UPN suffix attached to your administrative account. And I have created 3 different users on my on-prem domain controller. For those users, we are going to assign Microsoft 365 licenses and the next step. Second part has been completed. The third part is all about assigning the right licenses for these users so that they can access Windows Virtual Desktop session host. So this particular user is my on-prem user. It is currently unlicensed. So I'm going to make sure that this user have the right license to access Session Desktop and a remote app as well. So I'm going to assign Enterprise Mobility E5, an Office 365 E3, and a Windows 10 E3 as well. So I'm going to repeat the same process for other 2 more users. For this whole demonstration, I have picked up 3 different users so that I can show you different type of scenarios. For one user, I would probably go and deploy just a Session Desktop. For another user, I would probably go and deploy just remote apps. And for the third user, we will see an example where you can deploy both session host and remote app altogether. So a user can have either one or both as well. So now that we have completed our Active Directory domain configuration and we made sure that we have assigned the right licenses for these users, now head back to the Azure portal and search for Windows Virtual Desktop service. So as you can see that there is a brand new GUI available for Spring Update. Click on Create a Host Pool. So what we're going to do now is creating a new session desktop. Make sure you select the right subscription, create a new resource group. If you have an existing resource group where you placed your domain controller, you can select that. In my case, I picked the same resource group where my Active Directory is residing, and choose the location where you're going to keep the metadata for your Windows Virtual Desktop. And finally, you have an option where to pick, is it going to be a personal desktop or a pooled? Select the number of users you want to connect and the load balancing option. Is it going to be breadth first or the depth first? Click next to go into the virtual machine configuration. So we are going to add a new virtual machine to the whole Windows Virtual Desktop session host. Pick the region which is closest to you. And by default, Microsoft will recommend a virtual machine for the number of users you have selected. This is where you go back to the blog which I talked about, read and find out what's the right sizing for the VM. I'm going to pick one single VM for this demo today and provide a prefix for the Windows Virtual Desktop. There are multiple options how you can select an image. One, you can go to the Microsoft Gallery and pick the images available like Windows 10 multi-session, Windows 10 single desktop, or Windows 10 multi-session with Office 365 Pro Plus installed on it. I'm going to pick that because I want to deploy Office application along with the custom application for the user. The next selection is all about choosing the right disk type for this particular workload. Again, this is where we pick the right disk depending on the workload what the users are going to use. So I'm going to go with a standard SSD. You could bump up to premium SSD if you want low latency between your application and the operating system. I have already created a network, so it has been pre-populated for me. I'm going to choose that VNet, and the VNet already have a subnet associated with it, and my Active Directory belong in that particular subnet. So when I create this virtual machine for the session host, the session host would be able to talk to my domain controller, wherein with the IP, I don't have to choose a public IP because Windows Virtual Desktop use a reverse connect. So I don't have to expose my session host to the internet. I don't want to specify any particular OU. If you want to do that sort of a customization, of course you can do that. Again, the last step here is putting the right on-prem administrative username and password, which have enough rights for this session desktop to join that machine to your on-prem domain controller. The next step is creating a new workspace. So here basically it is asking, are you gonna create this session host to deploy a desktop or for apps? So in this instance, we are gonna create a desktop app group. What does that mean? That means that I'm gonna create this workspace for session desktop virtualization. So I'm gonna give a name to this particular workspace. I'm going to create a new workspace. I'm going to call it as Silver Labs WBD workspace. And once you get the green checkbox, select that and you can hit on review create, or you can assign some tags, things like that. Make sure you get a validate green checkbox from Azure. So basically what Azure is going to do is, based on all the information what we have given, it is going to validate that whether this deployment is going to be successful or not. Can this virtual machine talk to the domain controller? Does it have all the required things needed for this deployment to succeed? So this is a crucial step again. So make sure you get the green checkbox and start the deployment. Yep, our deployment has been completed successfully without any issues. It took me approximately 10 minutes to complete the whole deployment process. I can expand to find out all the things what happened under the hood, or I can click on go to resource to directly go into the host pool as well. As you can see now, I have one session host available. That means that I have one virtual machine running. And I remember correctly, we have assigned 5 maximum users to log into one session host. So you can either have multiple session hosts, or you can either start with one for your testing. And let's navigate to see what other options are available. I'm going into the session host. As I can see that as per the prefix I have given, WVD, it created the first virtual machine. So it assigned 0 next to the prefix. And the status is available. The location is Australia East. That's what I chose. And the drain mode is off as well because I have not configured the drain mode. The next step is to assign users to access the session host. So for that, we have to go back into the session host and right under manage, click on application groups. We have two options. One is desktop application group and remote application group. For this demo, we are going to click on the desktop application group. On the left hand side, you would be able to find assignments. So basically that's where we are going to go in and pick a single user, or we can add multiple users as well. So just search for the user. We have assigned the Microsoft 365 license. I'm going to pick the first user called the bird person to access the session desktop. Now that we have successfully added a user to access the session host, now let's go and find out how we can use this user to connect to the environment. So I have downloaded a remote desktop app. You can basically go to the Microsoft Download Center and you can download this app for the user. So either you can subscribe or subscribe with a URL. For this demonstration for Spring Update, we're going to use subscribe with a URL and put in the URL details on the email or the workspace URL and click next. It is going to take a little bit of time to give you an option to sign in. Sign in with the bird person account we just used to create this demo. And put in the password for that particular user. So this user is going to log in for the first time. I'm going to show you the first user experience. Looks like I have a workspace assigned for that particular user, and I can see that there is a session desktop available for that user. I can go to the settings. I can modify the settings on how I want to launch the desktop. Do I use multiple screens or a single desktop, and what's the preference like? Or I can go into the same remote app and I can change few properties like changing the dark mode or light mode, etc. Now I'm going to double tap and launch the session desktop for the particular user. I'm going to put in the password one more time. And this is going to launch the session desktop for bird person for the first time. As you can see that it is personalizing the desktop for the user. It's a blank Windows 10 multi-session. The only apps which is available in this particular session host is the Office apps, which comes default based on the image I picked. For the next demonstration, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through how you can set up a remote app. How can you configure the user profile for this session desktop? How are you going to install a custom application or a legacy application and deploy that via remote app or a session desktop, etc. So we're going to see a lot of different examples. Make sure to check the blog for detailed walkthrough on how you can do this step-by-step process. And I really hope that you enjoyed today's topic on how you can set up a session desktop on Windows Virtual Desktop. And I will see you on the next one. Till then, take care.